it gave me an effect that finally felt okay. I always felt different, not a part of, which is interesting because I really had a lot of friends, I was popular, and I don't mean that to be egotistical, but I just felt disconnected everywhere I went. There was still a piece of me that was in my head, and that was my sexuality, especially playing sports was, it was a huge passion for me. And, I just couldn't turn off that voice that says they're gonna find out. And I was telling myself, I don't know where I came up with the concept, but I had to be one or the other, and I couldn't be both. I had a lot of suicide thoughts. A lot of it had to do with being gay, but it was more these emotions that I didn't understand what was going on internally with me. And I didn't know how to describe that even to therapists and doctors or even my mom when she would ask like, what's wrong? And she could see that I was depressed. I couldn't put in words how I felt. The first time I drank, nothing happened. It was at my sister's birthday, and so one of my sister's friends offered me a Mike's Hard Lemonade, and I said no, because I said I don't like alcohol, and she said, oh, I'll just try it, and I took a sip, and I realized, wow, this doesn't burn, this doesn't taste like alcohol, and I helped myself to 3 more, and that was my first experience drinking where I really felt what I had chased and enjoyed for the following probably 10 years. And I don't believe that my friends were feeling the same way. Also, when I got into drugs and things got really bad, and the people I hung out with were using just as much as I was, people I don't think were having the consequences I was having. Some people may have got arrested or spent a lot of money, but the emotional consequences that I had were really what was driving me, to my bottom, and I just had no motivation for anything. All I thought about and all I wanted to do was get high and drink. And the worst time I would say was I was pulling away from my friends, people who were closest to me. I was either pushing them away or pulling them away because my using was increasing and I didn't want anything to get in my way. So I hung out with very few people and used with them. But even then, I could not accept when the party was over, so I would go out on my own and do my own thing. And I would say the lowest part was when my mom no longer waited at the door for me to get home. And I just remember that the dark place for me was coming home, the long drive home, wondering if I should hit the ditch, make it look like an accident. But I would make it home and then nobody was up, everyone was asleep, and I would be laying in my bed staring at my ceiling like going, why did I do this again? My drug dealer was a friend of mine, and I respected him a lot, and we hung out quite a bit. And I remember we were going to the mall one day and I asked him, to hook me up, and he was kind of like, what? We're going shopping, and I got upset and I said, what does it matter? Like, I'm paying for this. And he was like, yeah, but we're going shopping. Why do you need to get high? And something seemed wrong about that because I'm like, this is your job, you should have no questions, but yet he was a friend of mine and looking out for me, and he didn't understand. And I remember we got in, not a big argument, but it was just kind of like back and forth, like, well, why not? And I just was nagging, and I remember him throwing it at me, and finally, he said, here you go, you junkie. I remember I was gone for about 4 days, and my mom tracked down my dealer's number and called him.
Finally, it was, I think, about 7:30 at night, he finally answered it.
She said, "You need to come home now."
I said, "Trevor, aren't you coming home tonight?" And he said, "Yes." He said, "I am. I'll be home in about half an hour."
And so I got home, and again, like, I remember that show Intervention was out, and I was waiting for like the cameras and everything to be there, because I was desperately wanting that. I was wanting somebody to save me, because I didn't know how to bring it up or describe how I was feeling.
Anyways, he ended up coming home at 10:30, and we asked him if he had a drug problem.
But there were no cameras. There was no crew in my house. There was my mom and dad, and they were sitting in the living room, and my mom looked at me and she said, "Are you on drugs?" And my dad cut me off before I could even answer, and he said, "Don't give me that." He said, "I know you're on drugs." He said, "What are you doing, and what are you going to do about it?" And that was the first kind of breakdown that I knew the fight was like over, and it was close to the end. I had called a treatment center to get into treatment, and their first opening was in January. I've got 3 months to use.
It was probably 2 weeks later, I went to work, and he hadn't come home all weekend, and I couldn't get a hold of him.
You know, I started using a lot more. I was at a place that I worked at, and I stayed there all night, and I was using.
And I was so scared that he was dead.
And so that morning, I had no alcohol left, and I had no drugs left. And I knew the drugs weren't working anymore, because I had used that whole night, and it just couldn't get to that spot where everything would turn off. I picked up the phone and I called my sister, who I'm really close with.
She called me within half an hour and said, "I found him, Mom." He called me.
And I said, "I need you to come get me." I said, "I need to go to the hospital. I need to go check in somewhere, because I cannot stop doing this."
She said, "He's not doing good." And I said, "No, Leanne, I'm going to get him."
She said, "Well, let me call you right back." And 2 minutes later, my mom phoned. You know, as I shared before, she ended up showing up. She was there in about 15 minutes.
I remember him getting in the car, he had his hood up, and he just looked at me and he said, "Mom, I'm so."
And the entire ride, to the hospital, I was going to check into a detox. I couldn't look at her in the face. All she could say to me was like, "Everything's gonna be okay. You know, like you're fine, you're gonna be okay, we're gonna get through this together." And that's so difficult to, because I don't know what I'll put her through or what I put her through, but that was the unconditional love she gave me. And, as I said before, I believed her that it was gonna be okay. I don't know why, I don't know if something happened that morning where I just knew the gig was up. My mom said, "Well, why don't we go to the treatment center that you're on the waiting list for?" And I went over there with her, and I told the admissions people that I was done, and I was gonna die, and that I needed to get in sooner. This was end of November, and they said, "Well, we still have a waiting list, but if you come tomorrow at 6 a.m. and somebody doesn't show up for their assessment, we can do your assessment." And somehow I showed up that next morning, and someone didn't show up, and they did my assessment, and I was in 2 weeks later. That was my experience. On December 13th, I checked into treatment and started. It was like the first day of a new school, going from middle school to high school. I had no idea of the routine. Funny thing is, nobody told me. I mean, I know we had chores and we had to be there. It was almost like going to camp, and I had no structure in my life. Like, I was doing what I want, whenever I want, and how I wanted. I woke up to this music on an intercom, and it was the trumpet playing like they do in the army, and I remember thinking, where am I? The moment I got there, and I would go out and have a cigarette with someone, or there was a group of people in the lounge room, and we would get to talking. It was like there was a part of me that felt so safe being in there. Start sharing in group, I was like that same effect that drugs and alcohol gave me, like, oh my God, I can breathe, and just relax and be present. So that's what, treatment was like for me. Treatment was the first time that you know, all the fingers that I was pointing out at the rest of the world, like it was your fault, and if only this happened, and if only I had this, and it was the first time that somebody threw it back at me, and my counselor, I don't know how he did it, but the mirror just turned, and it made me realize that I was the problem. You know, I had created a lot of the disaster. Not everything was my fault, but it made me look at if something was going to change, it needed to be me. It wasn't all that external stuff that I was waiting on to happen. The group sessions were very powerful for me, to hear other people's stories, to see these guys that I thought were so tough break down and open up and you know, share about stuff they had done to their kids, and them suffering, you know, with some of the family stuff that I felt like, you know, I crushed my mom and dad and my sisters and, you know, the people I had hurt, and to realize I was in the same boat and I was on the same journey with all these other people, that was the most powerful. I really think if I didn't go to that treatment center that day, I don't think I would have waited till January, because it was that window that I reacted on that morning, that something, you know, and I could look back and know there were plenty of those windows of opportunity, but I didn't react on them. It was really hard to date or be in relationships. And I know that was a hesitation for him. You know, we joke about it today. I was like, what took you so long? And he always says, like, dude, you were in Dallas and you were in school. Like, what kind of hope was that?
Trevor had, I think it was nine years then. And he was a very sober living person. And that was important to me at that time in my life, to be with somebody that lived their life in a sober person's way. And I mean by that, by keeping your side of the street clean. You know, I think a lot of the reason that people are unhappy in their sobriety is because they don't live that way.
We got married 5 months ago. He's met my family. He was at my graduation. That was the first time all our families met, and yeah, I'm extremely grateful for him. He's also on this journey. So there's a lot of things that we have in common, and that he gets about me, and vice versa. And I think that's such a gift to have, because it's really a different language. You know, I've shared my story many times, and every time I do, something comes out of it. I can't count how many times I'd be sitting on a plane to a complete stranger, and somehow it gets brought up. And, you know, I can think of at least 5 times that I've been speaking with a woman, and she ends up crying next to me because her son is, you know, struggling with addiction. And I think that's a responsibility I have today, is to continue sharing this, because a lot of people, to the untrained eye, don't know what addiction really is. They don't understand why their son, daughter, spouse, mother, friend keeps doing this stuff to themselves and knowing that it's killing them. If it was too much for me to talk about that, or if there's certain areas that I can't go or look at, or things are triggering for me, I mean, and keep in mind, I've been sober 11 years, that, you know, there's things that I wouldn't do when I was maybe 3 months sober, suggest. But I don't think that's full sobriety if I have things that are still too much for me, and I continue to work at that, and it's every day I have to do that. Today's just a lot different, and it comes second nature. It's no longer like something that I have to think about. It is my life.